be here. I just want to say, Mark sort of sold himself short in terms of the leadership that he provides. Before the Blue Ribbon Task Force, which really was Mark's idea of putting leaders from across the country of the industry together, there was a view that, well, let's just wait for a crisis to happen. Well, with a crisis, you lose control of the situation, and we don't have to look much further than the Port of Vancouver, for example, to see where the labor market is completely broken down, and the level of intervention in the marketplace there, I don't think is healthy for the longer term. So without guys like Mark stepping up, we wouldn't be here today. And I can say that about a lot of things that both CTA and OTA are involved in. I have 5 points I want to make today. First, why OTA supports mandatory entry-level training, how we see it impacting the driver shortage, how the industry is taking control, or ownership rather, of the competency standards, a few words about next steps, and then finally just a brief discussion about the longer term. Well, in terms of why we support mandatory entry-level training, once upon a time there were lots of young people coming off the farms, or people that we could get from the construction industry that had spent a lot of time around heavy machinery, probably driving from about the age of 12, and they didn't need a whole lot of training to be employable. They came with a good work ethic and a good background, and really they just needed some finishing. That's not the situation today. Those people are now few and far between, and the most common complaint, and Mark alluded to it, that I hear is that the people coming in the door today, Class AZ in hand, don't even have a basic level of skill that would make them remotely employable by most carriers. And let's not forget that when the carrier hires them, they take them and over time turn them into a professional truck driver. The level of training in the industry is inconsistent. I think we're talking to the converted here. The members of TTSAO would be at the one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum are the so-called puppy mills. We all know that simply holding a Class AZ license is no assurance that that person has any basic level of skill. That has obvious implications for safety, also has implications for productivity and efficiency. And I would think that if the public were really aware of the fact that you could basically walk in off the street in any jurisdiction in North America today and challenge the commercial license test, I think they'd be shocked. So again, that's where we started. And we think it's consistent with OTA's position on speed limiters, on electronic logging devices, on electronic stability control, that we need to up our game as an industry, because the quality of people that are out there right now are in very short supply. And it's true that we have a driver shortage, and Mark alluded to that. And the one point I want to make here is, it may seem somewhat counterintuitive, and people have said to me, well, why, if you have a driver shortage, do you want to raise the bar? Why do you want to make it more difficult to get into the industry when you don't have people to begin with? Well, what we say to that is that we actually think that by raising the bar, that by at some point bringing the occupation into the same realm as other so-called trades, that we're actually going to increase the attractiveness of our business and the quality of people that are coming into the sector. Unfortunately, right now, too often it's looked at as the job of last resort. You can go and spend $100, a couple $100, you'll get enough, whatever you call it, I won't call it training, and you'll pass the Class A test. And you're licensed to haul a double tanker of gasoline down the 401. Now, no reputable carrier would do that, but two things happens to those people. They either then become disgruntled, and you all get the calls, I get them daily from people who say, I hear you got a shortage, I've got my license and no one will hire me. Or they gravitate to the bottom of the barrel carriers and perpetuate the problems that we have out on the highways and in the marketplace. So we really think that for the first time now, we have younger people, and not just younger people, but also people, the displaced workers, who are looking at the trades. That having a BA degree is not a ticket to anything necessarily these days, so their parents, guidance counselors are looking at the trades. Well, we're not in that game. We're not considered to be a trade. We're not considered to be a skilled occupation. Therefore, we tend to attract often those people who can't do anything else. And I've heard from TTSAO members the number of people, quality people, that you aren't able to bring on board because at the end of the day, not being a trade, not having availability of funding, they go off and become plumbers, electricians, and something else. So we lose out. So again, maybe counterintuitive, but we think this is going to help us to resolve the driver shortage. The third point I wanted to make was about the industry taking ownership of well, they're called the National Occupational Standards, but let's call them the competency standards. And this is the project that's been underway, joint project CTA and Trucking HR Canada, to review the existing National Occupational Standards and to update them. And there's been more consultation done on this issue than any I can remember in a long, long time across the country. There's a national working group. We've got a few members on that group here today, people like Garth Pitzel at Bison. Guy, I see Guy back there somewhere. There's Guy from APPS. And they've done a hell of a lot of work across the country. And yesterday, I understand, they approved the 5th and final draft of the NOS. And that's a really good thing because the NOS defines the competencies that are typical of the skills that someone would pick up early in their career. So that's very, very important to us. What happened in previous iterations of this, quite frankly, the consultation wasn't there. The NOS, and it's not just the NOS, other curricula and those sorts of things also fall victim to this because you can't have 1,000 people holding the pen, that they ended up being developed in a back room somewhere, out of sight, out of mind, and therefore never had the industry buy-in that they deserved and needed. And this time around we said, we're not going to make that mistake. And we started first with the carriers, because I think it's important that without carriers, you guys don't have customers and you don't have a business. And I thought it was really important that the carriers took ownership because they're ultimately the customers. They're the ones that dictate what they want of new drivers. So that's why we started off first with carriers, then moved the consultation out to insurers, to the driving schools, to drivers, to anybody else that had an interest. Therefore, I think there is a higher degree of ownership this time around. Plus, the NOS themselves are much more descriptive and will therefore inform training schools, driver trainers, carriers, governments, whoever, in terms of what you really need to do in order to achieve those competencies and ultimately to test for those competencies as well. Now, I'm sure you can't see this, but this is the outline of the NOS, and as I say, the 5th and final draft is now complete. The 4th draft is on the Trucking HR Canada's website and has been since December. There are 3 general competency elements. Supportive, those are the soft interpersonal skills. Functional non-driving, those would be basic numeracy, trip inspection, compliance with the hours of service standards, and then finally the 3rd element of competency, driving, defensive driving, being able to back up properly. That's the common thing I hear from carriers. The guy can't even back up a trailer. Fuel efficient, maximization of fuel efficiency, those sorts of things. But under those 3 elements, there are 29 blocks of competency standards. So more descriptive, more information, it will inform training, curricula, licensing, testing, and whatnot. And this should now be approved. The process from here would be to go to the associations across the country, and then ultimately to CTA next month, where it will receive approval.